He didn't break you. He revealed you. Not your weakness, your wounds, not your flaws, your patterns. What hurt you wasn't him. It was what surfaced. Because of him, you didn't fall apart because you were fragile. You fell apart because something unresolved was finally touched. People don't break us. They activate what was already waiting to be seen. And that truth is uncomfortable because it means this wasn't just about him. He didn't create your pain. He exposed where you were still abandoning yourself. You noticed it in hindsight, how quickly you adjusted, how easily you excused, how often you ignored what felt wrong just to keep connection. You call that love, but it was survival. You stayed when your body said no. You explained when your intuition was clear. You waited when your needs were unmet, not because you were weak, but because you learned that love requires endurance. Somewhere in your past, you learned that being chosen meant being flexible, quiet, understanding, low maintenance. So when he pulled back, you leaned forward. When he became inconsistent, you became patient. When he gave less, you tried harder. That pattern didn't start with him. He just triggered it. And that's why this hurts so deeply. Because he didn't just leave. He mirrored where you still needed validation from someone outside yourself. You weren't broken. You were exposed. Exposed to how much you tied your worth to being wanted. Exposed to how often you ignored red flags because loneliness felt louder. Exposed to how quickly you gave access without requiring safety. He didn't ruin your confidence. He showed you where it was conditional. Confidence that disappears when someone withdraws was never confidence. It was approval dependency. And approval dependency always collapses under emotional inconsistency. That's why you spiraled. Not because he was special, but because he touched the place inside you that still believed love must be earned. You didn't lose yourself. You found the part of you that needed attention, the part that says yes when it wants to say no, the part that stays silent to avoid abandonment, the part that overgives, hoping to be chosen. He didn't break you. He revealed where healing was overdue. And here's the shift. Once something is revealed, it can no longer control you. Awareness changes everything. What once felt like devastation becomes information. What once felt like rejection becomes redirection. This wasn't punishment. It was exposure therapy for your patterns. And painful as it was, it woke you up because now you see you don't need to fix what he did. You need to heal what it activated. And that's where your real power begins. At first, you blamed him. That was easier than looking at what cracked open inside you. You replayed his words, his silence, his withdrawal. You wondered how someone could care and still walk away. But slowly, something deeper surfaced. A question you didn't want to ask. Why did this affect me this much? Not why it hurt. Of course it hurt. But why it unraveled you. That's where the truth lives. You didn't fall apart because you loved deeply. You fell apart because love touched a wound that was already there. A wound that learned long before him that connection was unstable. A wound that learned love could disappear. A wound that learned you had to earn closeness by adapting. So when he pulled away, your nervous system didn't experience disappointment. It experienced danger. That's why it felt urgent. That's why you couldn't rest. That's why your mind spiraled, looking for answers. Your body wasn't reacting to him. It was reacting to old abandonment. You didn't lose him. You lost regulation. And that distinction changes everything. Because once you see that, you stop shaming yourself for overreacting. You understand. You were responding from a place that learned. Love equals uncertainty. So you tried to stabilize it. You overcommunicated. You overexplained. You overgave. Not because you wanted control, but because your system was trying to restore safety. This is important. You weren't chasing him. You were chasing calm. But calm can't be found in someone else's behavior. And that's the lesson he revealed. He showed you where you outsourced your peace. You gave someone else the power to determine whether you were okay. That's not weakness. That's conditioning. At some point in your life, you learned that being wanted meant being safe. So when he hesitated, your body heard. You are at risk. That's why you abandoned yourself. Not consciously, automatically. You ignored your needs to preserve connection. You silenced discomfort to keep closeness. You minimized intuition to avoid loss. Those aren't character flaws. They're survival strategies. And survival strategies don't disappear just because we grow up. They wait until intimacy triggers them. He didn't invent this pattern. He activated it. That's why blaming him never brought relief. Because the pain wasn't located in what he did. It was located in what you believed about what his leaving meant. It meant, I'm not chosen. I'm not secure. I'm not safe. Those beliefs didn't originate with him. He just pressed on them. And once pressed, they demanded attention. This is where healing actually begins. Not in fixing your past choices, but in understanding why you made them. You weren't ignoring red flags because you're naive. You were overriding intuition because familiarity felt safer than truth. You weren't staying too long because you lacked standards. You were hoping consistency would finally arrive. If you endured long enough, that endurance once kept you connected, but now it costs you. And that's the evolution. What once protected you now restricts you. He didn't break you. He revealed that the version of you who survived was still running the system. And survival mode doesn't know how to receive. It only knows how to manage risk. That's why love felt tense. You were scanning, waiting, bracing, not enjoying. You weren't present. You were prepared. Prepared for withdrawal. Prepared for loss. Prepared for disappointment. And that state can't coexist with secure love. So the relationship became the mirror. It showed you how often you abandon yourself to keep others. It showed you how easily you trade truth for attachment. It showed you how much reassurance you seek externally instead of internally. And once you see that, you can't unsee it. You stop asking why he couldn't show up. You start asking why you stayed when he didn't. Not with blame, with curiosity. That curiosity is the doorway. Because now, you're no longer trying to fix the relationship. You're repairing your relationship with yourself. You begin to sit with discomfort instead of fleeing it. You let disappointment exist without rushing to resolve it. You allow endings without turning them into emergencies. This is nervous system healing. It's slow, quiet, unglamorous, but powerful. You stop reacting. You start responding. You stop chasing clarity from people. You create it inside yourself. And the moment you do, everything shifts. Because the part of you that once panicked now listens. The part that once begged now pauses. The part that once overgave now observes. This is how patterns dissolve. Not through force, through awareness. He didn't break you. He revealed where self-trust was still under construction. And now, you finally know what to fix. Not yourself. Your relationship with safety. Awareness changes the story, but embodiment changes the outcome. Knowing your patterns isn't enough. You have to live differently. When they're triggered, this is where the real work begins. Because the next time someone pulls back, your body will still react. The difference is, you'll notice it. You'll feel the tightening in your chest, the urge to explain, the impulse to reach out too quickly, and instead of obeying it, you'll pause. That pause is everything. It's the moment where choice returns. Before, your reactions ran the show. Now, you witness them. You don't shame yourself for feeling anxious. You regulate. You breathe. You ground. You remind yourself that connection is not a test. You remind yourself that distance is information, and information doesn't require panic. This is how you stop abandoning yourself, not by becoming cold, but by becoming present. You stop chasing reassurance. You start offering safety to yourself. You don't rush to fix tone. You observe behavior. You don't interpret silence as rejection. You let it reveal intention. This is subtle, but it changes everything. Because now, you're no longer negotiating your worth for consistency. You're watching who shows up without pressure. You're noticing who stays steady when you stop overgiving. And that's when clarity arrives, not through conversation, through pattern. People who only felt secure when you overfunctioned begin to fade, not because you pushed them away, but because you stopped holding them up. This can feel lonely at first because you were used to being needed, and now you're choosing to be respected. That transition is uncomfortable, but it's also freeing. You begin to feel your center return. You sleep better. You think more clearly. You stop replaying every interaction. Your nervous system learns that nothing collapses when you don't chase. And slowly, trust grows, not in others, in yourself. You trust that you can feel discomfort without self-betrayal. You trust that you can lose someone without losing yourself. That trust is magnetic because when you're no longer operating from fear, your energy shifts. You're calmer, more grounded, less reactive. People feel it. Some are drawn closer. Others step back. Both outcomes are correct because you're no longer seeking connection at any cost. You're allowing alignment. And alignment doesn't require effort. It requires honesty. You also stop romanticizing potential. You stop investing in who someone could be. You relate to who they are consistently, presently, and that alone protects you. You don't need to harden. You just need to stay with yourself. You let feelings rise. You let them pass. You don't act from urgency. You act from clarity. That's maturity, not perfection. And here's the quiet truth. Healing doesn't make you immune. It makes you less available to what harms you. He didn't break you. He prepared you to recognize when your old wounds try to drive again, prepared you to choose differently without self-attack, prepared you to stop proving and start protecting. And once this becomes embodied, you don't need reminders. Your body knows. Eventually, something settles, not because the memory disappears, but because it no longer controls you. You stop asking what you could have done differently. You stop replaying every moment, looking for the mistake, because you finally understand. The lesson wasn't how to keep him. It was how to keep yourself. You no longer frame the experience as damage. You frame it as information. And information is empowering. You see clearly now how pain became a teacher, not a punishment. You see how the relationship was never meant to last. It was meant to reveal. Reveal where you gave too much, too early. Reveal where you confused chemistry with safety. Reveal where you waited to be chosen instead of choosing yourself. That clarity does something profound. It restores your authority. You stop narrating your life through other people's reactions. You stop calibrating your worth based on who stays. You stop needing proof to trust what you feel. And when that happens, your energy changes. You move slower. You listen more. You don't rush intimacy. You don't overinvest. Before consistency appears, you let people earn access, not through words, through behavior. You no longer explain your needs into existence. You watch who meets them naturally. That alone filters your life. You notice how peaceful it feels to not convince, to not pursue clarity, to not chase reassurance. Your nervous system finally learns something new. Nothing bad happens when you don't abandon yourself. You don't lose love. You lose chaos. You lose anxiety. You lose emotional labor that was never meant to be yours. And in that space, something better grows. Self-respect. That doesn't fluctuate. Standards. That don't need defending. Boundaries. That don't require explanation. You also become gentler with your past self. You stop calling her naive. You stop calling her foolish. You see her clearly. She wasn't stupid. She was hopeful. She wasn't blind. She was conditioned to believe love required tolerance. And now, you're no longer operating from that belief. That's growth, not bitterness. Wisdom. You still love deeply, but you don't disappear doing it. You still care, but you don't self-sacrifice. You still open your heart, but you don't leave it unguarded. You've learned the difference between vulnerability and self-erasure, and that difference protects you. The next person won't trigger the same reaction, not because they're perfect, but because you're regulated. You'll notice the early signs, the inconsistency, the emotional distance, the avoidance, and instead of trying to fix it, you'll step back, not dramatically, not angrily, but calmly, because you know now what's meant for you doesn't require self-betrayal. What's meant for you doesn't confuse your body. What's meant for you feels steady. And if something feels familiar in the wrong way, you listen. That's the final shift. You trust yourself fully. He didn't break you. He revealed where you were still negotiating with your own boundaries. And once revealed, those patterns lost their grip. Because awareness leads to choice. Choice leads to change. And change leads to peace. This is what healing looks like. Not dramatic closure. Quiet self-loyalty. Not revenge. Release. Not answers from him. Alignment within you. You don't need to thank him. You don't need to revisit the past. You don't need closure conversations. You already received what mattered. Yourself. Whole. Grounded. Aware. And no one can take that from you. Ever. If this spoke to something you've been carrying quietly, take a moment to sit with it. And if you want more reflections like this, more clarity, more grounded reminders to choose yourself without hardening, you're welcome to stay. Subscribe when it feels right. And if this reached you at the right time, share it with someone who might need the same reminder. You don't have to walk this part alone.